Ever since it came out, a lot of you have been telling me that a movie called Bird Box came out on Netflix and if I could compare it to another movie. So I gave it a watch and I noticed that its horror concept bears several similarities to another horror movie that came out the same year, A Quiet Place. After reminiscing on Bird Box for a few days and seeing the huge success it has become, I thought I'd make a video explaining whether I think it's deserving of that success, or if it is just overrated. So with that being said, it's time to compare Bird Box to A Quiet Place. Let the battle commence. Now the story for both of these movies is very similar in the sense that it consists of characters who are forced to limit the use of one of their 5 senses. The story for A Quiet Place revolves around a family and takes place in a post-apocalyptic world. The majority of humanity has been killed off by these monsters that have super sensitive hearing. The only remaining humans is this family who have learned to survive and live their lives very quietly. And as well as being a horror, the movie is essentially a drama that shows how this family deals with loss and how they are struggling to live in these very dangerous conditions. And the story for Bird Box is that thousands of people are committing suicide after they see this invisible force. What this force is, we don't know, but whatever it is, people look at it and see their worst fears. This results in them becoming super depressed and they immediately commit suicide. In addition to this, the movie cuts between 2 different timelines and shows us both the past and the present. In the past, the story consists of our characters locking themselves in a house, and in the present, it consists of the remaining 3 embarking on a journey to reach a shelter where they can stay and safely live the rest of their lives. And Bird Box constantly cuts back and forth between the 2 timelines as the film goes on. Now both of these movies have more of a concept than an actual story. The concept is mostly there as a setup so we can partake in the scares that come with a horror movie, and it also provides limitations on the characters, so when they inevitably have to take action and do things in these dangerous conditions, they will face a lot of horrifying challenges. So with that said, which of the 2 movies has the superior story? Well, seeing as they are both very light, I'm going to have to make the decision based on the story's pacing and structure. And I feel that Bird Box was stretching its runtime quite long at 2 hours. It should have been a lot tighter and would have benefited from shaving off at least 20 minutes or so. A Quiet Place, however, has a runtime of 1 hour and 30 minutes, and for this kind of post-apocalyptic survival film, this is the perfect length, and it never has a slow or dull moment. And this is especially impressive when you take into account that most of the movie is presented as a silent film. So the story for both of these movies got the job done, but the pacing and tight structure of A Quiet Place wins out here. So the movie with the superior story is A Quiet Place. Alright, now both of these films have big differences with their characters. The first is the number. In Bird Box, you have tons of characters and you come across even more as the film goes on. In A Quiet Place, there are only 4. Well, 5 if you count the kid who dies at the beginning, and 6 if you count that old man who has about 5 seconds of screen time. So A Quiet Place is given the obvious advantage that it has less characters to develop. At the same time, however, it also has a huge disadvantage as it is forced to develop them with next to no dialogue, just facial expressions and sign language. So this movie essentially had to make us care for characters that had pretty much 0 dialogue. That is no easy feat, but it succeeded, as the family in this film are great and really likable. They each have their own unique personalities, the kids legitimately act their age, the wife tries her best to give her children a normal childhood and upbringing, and the husband is the man of the house and perfectly demonstrates that he will go as far as he possibly can to protect his family. And the acting is terrific. Even the kids are very talented and deliver genuine emotions, and this is all the more commendable when you take into account that they haven't acted in many movies prior to this, so they really deserve props for that. Even Emily Blunt and John Krasinski deserve high praise for their performances here. I mean, John Krasinski managed to deliver this performance while simultaneously directing the film, and his real-life wife, Emily Blunt, managed to deliver really intense performances like this in just 1 take. Really, the outstanding performances from these actors really does make you like and feel concerned for the characters from start to finish. And when a horror movie succeeds in making you care for the characters, the scares are so much more horrifying and intense. As for the characters in Bird Box, well, I think it's best that we start with the performances from these actors first. The acting in this movie was questionable to say the least. People just don't react as you would expect them to. I mean, John Malkovich's character here watches his wife die and he has no reaction. He doesn't even call out to her and tell her to snap out of it or something. Even when he starts talking a few seconds after her death, you don't even hear a tiny shred of shock or distress in his voice or anything. During this time, I was trying to figure out what his relationship was with this woman. Wife crossed my mind first, but it crossed right out as soon as I saw his non-caring reaction when she walked out into the suicidal street, so I figured she was just a random woman he let come into his house. The rest of the performances are just standard. These are characters that are just meant to die as we go deeper into the movie, and you don't really care for any of them. So yeah, the acting from most of the cast is above average at best. The only really good performances we get are from Sandra Bullock, Trevante Rhodes, and John Malkovich, not counting that previous scene. Now, something else I noticed pretty instantaneously about these characters is that they do some pretty stupid stuff. The dumbest thing by far is when Charles pushes the crazy guy back into the refrigerator room by running into the room itself. Now, why did he do that? He could have pushed the guy without entering the room, but he, for some reason, dashed in with him. When me and my brothers watched it, we were really mesmerized by the sheer stupidity of this scene. It felt like the director wanted to include a death scene at the last minute, so this is what they shot. And there was another dumb scene where this deranged guy tells them to look at the evil force, and this old woman begs him no and runs towards him for some reason, giving him the chance to force her eyes open. Again, it was another forced death scene. Why would she run towards him? She should have stayed where she was and closed her eyes, or left the room, or tried to throw something at him. But why did she run towards him and get closer to viewing sight of the thing that can kill her? There are so many other dumb moments like this in the movie, but for the sake of time, I'm not gonna get into them. As for stupid character moments in A Quiet Place, there really was only one, and that was the death of the kid in the opening scene. Now, I know he's just a kid, but seeing as they have been living in this post-apocalyptic world where they have to stay absolutely quiet, you would think, like the rest of his family, loud sounds would get his heart pounding with fear. But it doesn't. He risks making noise in the shop they're in, despite being told to stay quiet, and then he puts batteries into this toy, and instead of immediately dropping it when it turns on, he raises it above him, and then dies. Now, I know what you guys are gonna say, he's just a kid, and I would make the same argument if this whole keeping silent or die thing was new, but it isn't. He's a very young kid who has been practically raised with the habits of keeping quiet. You'd think he would know better than to make so much noise. I'm honestly surprised that his family have lived for as long as they have with him around. The two kids in Bird Box also had a similar problem. There are times when they take their blindfolds off and it starts out understandable, but then it mostly comes down to their own stupidity for not following the clear rules their mother set for them. And whenever I see naivety in a character, much like I did in A Quiet Place, it never makes me care for that person. And unlike the kid in A Quiet Place, these kids are in a big chunk of the film. Now again, you can make the argument that they are just kids, but when you take into account that these kids were raised in a post-apocalyptic world since birth, I don't buy that. They, more than the kid in A Quiet Place, should know the rules. As for nice family moments between the characters, Tom and the kids had some nice moments, but it was immediately cut off from Sandra Bullock's character, who wants to treat the kids like, well, with even less respect than animals. She calls the kids boy and girl. I mean, we give names to animals for crying out loud. Does she really have to go to the extreme and not even give the kids names? I mean, even super tough and stern characters like Kratos give their kids names. So what's her excuse? I personally thought the movie was trying really hard to force some deep drama here, and if the reasons for her doing this were more logical rather than stupid, then I would have bought it. But I didn't. And as a result, anytime the movie tried to give us some nice moments with the kids, it just came off as stiff and disingenuous.
This is strawberry. This is what strawberry tastes like.
I have never bought Pop-Tarts before, but I am sure they don't have real strawberries in them. You know what? Be back in a sec. Well, it's kind of true. They have just 7% of strawberries, which is basically corporate talk for 0%. So this little whimsically happy moment about the taste of strawberries is being conveyed with food that has no strawberries in it. What else is she gonna tell these poor kids? This is what meat tastes like. Anyway, it just felt like the movie was trying way too hard to make Sandra Bullock a tough survivor. And it was just dumb, because even another tough survivor gave her kid a name. Now, were there any nice family moments in A Quiet Place? Well, yeah. As a matter of fact, there were a lot. The father taking his terrified son to go fishing was one of them. This was especially touching because as much as he clearly and understandably didn't want to go, he is told that he has to learn, so if anything happened to his father, he can take over as the man of the house. And the mother is still very loving towards their kids and tries to give them a traditional upbringing so they feel normal and can live their lives as opposed to always feeling panic and anxiety. And that's what I like about the parents in A Quiet Place over Bird Box. They equip their kids with the necessary knowledge to survive, alive, and they also act like a normal, loving family at the same time. It's very nice and uplifting to see, and it just makes you care for the characters even more. You don't get any of that in Bird Box. I mean, the so-called family don't even seem to care about each other. Sandra Bullock's character falls endlessly down the forest and gets knocked out, and how do the kids react? I mean, seriously, how am I supposed to feel emotionally attached to these characters when they are not even emotionally attached to each other? These characters really should have been written much better than this. So when you take all of that into account, the movie with the far superior characters, without a shadow of a doubt, is A Quiet Place. They just act and emote like real people, and watching them try to live through this very dark time is really endearing. And when faced with danger, they display the correct emotions and you genuinely care for them. Whereas in Bird Box, I really couldn't care less for any of them. Now, both movies utilize two very similar yet very different horror techniques. In A Quiet Place, the characters have to refrain from making any sounds, and in Bird Box, they have to refrain from using their eyes. This greatly cripples them, as the slightest slip-up will be the end of them. But of course, a concept is only as good as its execution, and Bird Box has several great sequences where the characters have to get around without using their eyes. My favourite situation is when they are trying to go to a supermarket so they can get more supplies. They cover up the windows of the car and they use the sat-nav to guide themselves to the store. The movie did cheat, however, because once they got all of their supplies, they had to carry this load of stuff to the car, and the movie just skips it and doesn't show us how they did it, even though that would have been a big hurdle in of itself. The film also tries to ask some interesting questions, one of them being, if looking at this thing can kill us, what if we looked at it through security cameras? Would it still be able to affect us? So set pieces and ideas like that were interesting to me, and by far the best parts of the film, when they test the rules of this force. Now, from a filmmaking point of view, A Quiet Place had a much harder job, as it had to create this feeling of insecurity that a sound may go off and endanger our characters at any moment, regardless of their location. Whereas in Bird Box, the characters were always safe whenever they were indoors, and A Quiet Place does such a great job at drawing us into this atmosphere that is created that even we as an audience feel this obligation that we have to keep quiet like the characters. So A Quiet Place did an excellent job at taking advantage of its no noise concept, and it really immerses you into the movie from start to finish. Now, the concept of not looking was effective in Bird Box, but there is one big caveat. Whereas in A Quiet Place, the characters weren't allowed to talk, and we felt like we weren't allowed to talk either. In Bird Box, the characters may be blind, but we can always see them, and they might think they're in danger, but since we always see their surroundings, we know they are going to be okay. In A Quiet Place, however, keeping quiet with your breathing when you're scared and have a nail stabbed into your foot, whilst also having to keep quiet whilst you're going into labor, and having to keep your newborn baby quiet, these are far more intense circumstances, and the movie constantly throws the characters into situation after situation, each one getting worse than the last. And not to mention that one of the kids is deaf, so she could be making a sound and not even realize it. And that's what makes A Quiet Place all the more intense. Regardless of whether they are inside or not, the characters are always in danger, as if they make the slightest sound, the creatures can easily enter the house whenever they please. So that constant feeling of danger is always there. In Bird Box, however, our characters have too many safe zones. Additionally, the film has so many characters that some are obviously there just so they can die. In A Quiet Place, however, we mainly have 4 characters, and this gives you the time to care for each and every single one of them. There is no wasted space of a character here, not to mention that the movie opens with the unexpected death of a child, and this is right at the beginning of the film, and this pretty much establishes that the movie has no problem killing off children, so it makes you fear for the kids a whole lot more. Whereas the kids in Bird Box, they get in danger, but that's about it. They somehow miraculously find their way back to Sandra Bullock's character every single time they get separated. Now, the budget for both of these films is very similar. For A Quiet Place, it's $17 million, and Bird Box has a $19.8 million budget. It uses none of its budget, however, to show you what these creatures look like. Now, at the very least, I think they should have given them some sort of visual, kind of like in Final Destination. In Final Destination, whenever the Force appeared around its victims, people would see a strange reflection or see some shift in the atmosphere, and little details like that made this invisible force seem a lot more tangible and creepy. It was a smart way of giving you a glimpse of the evil force without showing you it. and I feel like Bird Box would have benefited from something similar. Not seeing the monster is a good technique of filmmaking, but in this movie's case, it very quickly felt like the movie was just using a bunch of leaves and a gush of wind as a means to save money, and it really crippled the intense nature of this movie. Now, they did make designs for the creatures which were actually very meh, but for some reason, presumably budgetary, they just scrapped the design and decided to go with nothing. Now, I would have been somewhat okay with this if the rules for these invisible monsters actually made sense, but they don't. Apparently, these things can convince you to kill yourself by showing you your worst fear, and they can also make you see a long-lost relative. And on top of that, they can even imitate people's voices. Now, if they kept the rules of these creatures very simple and consistent, then it would have worked to the film's benefit, but it honestly feels like they were making them up as they went along. And instead of contemplating the look of these monsters in your imagination, you start to contemplate and question the logistics of them instead. And when you do that, the movie completely falls apart. I can buy that these things would convince or possess these people to kill themselves after showing them their worst fears, but why would they kill themselves after seeing something from their past? Now, all the stuff I've mentioned are big problems, but by far, the biggest problem to me is this guy. Now, the movie establishes countless times that once these monsters are seen, whether it be from normal or crazy people, their eyes change. So if that's the case, and this guy was in fact crazy the whole time, the question remains, how the hell did he have normal eyes? Because a few minutes later, when the movie decides to hit us with a twist, his eyes suddenly change color, and the movie acts like this is a big and emotional betrayal. How could the characters have possibly known that he was crazy all along? Didn't this twist catch you by surprise? Well, yes, it did catch me by surprise, but for all the wrong reasons. Not only does this make zero sense, but the movie just completely broke its rules and cheated right here, and it just makes this guy's horrifying actions that take place feel forced and stupid. And this plot hole didn't have to even exist. I mean, an easy fix for this would have been if the movie said, you know what, crazy people who see this thing don't have any visible changes happen to their eyes. Then he could have entered the house and everything would have made sense. But nope, they established the eye-changing rule only to go against it when it served as a convenience to the movie. What a joke. So the movie that has the vastly superior horror and horror concept is A Quiet Place. A Quiet Place has very simple and clear rules with its monsters, and it sticks to them. Additionally, the horror is so creative with the setups and made the film one of the most intense horror films I've seen. And if you watch this movie with a good sound system and a subwoofer, you will be in for one hell of a horrifying experience. So when you get down to it, both of these movies have great concepts, but only one of them takes full advantage of it. And whilst A Quiet Place does have its problems, such as the black paint on Emily Blunt's foot, which they embarrassingly forgot to colour correct red, the narrative problems are not as easy to spot, unless you go out of your way to find them. Bird Box, on the other hand, has so many easily identifiable problems regardless of whether you turn your brain off or not, and it really damaged the overall film. It's time for the scores. When I first watched Bird Box, I gave it a 5, but after giving it some additional thought and realizing just how forgettable and disposable of a movie it is, my score has gone down to a 4 out of 10, and A Quiet Place gets a 9. Bird Box is inferior in every way to A Quiet Place, and it's just frustrating to sit through. You question the rules of the evil force, you constantly shake your head at the characters, and it ends on such a safe and anticlimactic note that it kind of makes you feel like you just wasted your time. That's not the case with A Quiet Place. A Quiet Place establishes its rules and sticks with them, whereas Bird Box establishes rules and then goes against them when it finds it convenient, which, at that point, I'm out. You're just forcing these setups that you can't be bothered to smartly set up. Also, A Quiet Place expertly builds up the monster's appearance for the first half of the movie as they're constantly being shown in the background, or you'll just see a claw. And it very smartly gives you a good payoff, and it even gives you an answer as to where humanity will go by the end of the movie. Bird Box, however, does not give you an answer. If anything, it leaves you with important questions that you want answers to, but you don't get any. It didn't hint at anything smart, the threat still exists, and the movie just ends in a safe and uncreative way. It just kind of makes you leave the film thinking, well, that was kind of pointless. So, suffice to say, Bird Box left a very sour taste in my mouth by the time it was over. When A Quiet Place ended, however, I left with this feeling of accomplishment and satisfaction. The movie had purpose, and it rewarded you for investing your time, and this ending, although a little abrupt, was perfectly executed. And in this day and age of SJWs and forced empowerment, the movie managed to make Emily Blunt's character a badass. Also, as I was making this video, it dawned on me that John Krasinski could actually play a great live-action Joel from The Last of Us. Anyway, I digress. In conclusion, Bird Box really was a lackluster movie. It had a good concept, but as I said at the beginning of this video, a concept is only as good as its execution, and unlike A Quiet Place, Bird Box did not deliver. So that's it for another Versus video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to leave a comment down below. Also, share this video so more people will be aware of the show. And tell me, what is your favourite horror movie of 2018? And more importantly, what is your most anticipated horror movie of 2019? For me, the scariest movie of 2018 was A Quiet Place, and my most anticipated horror film of the year is a cross between It Chapter 2 and Annabelle 3. Mainly because it has Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga back as the Warrens, which really piqued my interest. Be sure to let me know. And if Article 13 doesn't take effect, I will see all of you next time. Take care.